Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching India Tonight with me, Samita Kareer. We'll be taking you through the top stories in business and politics over the next 30 minutes. But right on top, well, Donald Trump, who's won the US presidential elections, has been getting congratulatory messages from world leaders. And the latest one has come in from none other than the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has extended that message at a forum last night. He even added that Moscow was ready for dialogue with the Republican president-elect and that his desire to restore relations with Russia, quote-unquote, deserve attention. While the comments were not just restricted to the congratulatory message, Putin even went on to praise Donald Trump's courage during an assassination attempt in July this year. And remember, the Kremlin earlier as well has welcomed Trump's claim that he could negotiate an end to the conflict in Ukraine in quote-unquote 24 hours, but it did emphasize that it would wait for concrete policy steps. So the big question is, can this camaraderie lead to the end of the Ukraine-Russia war? Is that in sight? To discuss those and many more points, we're now joined by Alastair Newton, CEO of Alavan Business Advisory, and Santosh Rao, the head of research and partner at Manhattan Venture Partners. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on ET Now. First, to you, Alastair. At least 70 world leaders have been congratulating Trump after his victory, but this one surely has raised eyebrows. How should his comments be read? Is it just simple courtesy? And secondly, what does Putin want from America?
Well, it certainly didn't raise my eyebrows in the slightest, with all due respect. I would fully have expected Vladimir Putin, who had a pretty good relationship with Donald Trump during Trump's first term, I would fully have expected him to phone and congratulate Donald Trump on his victory, to be pleased with Donald Trump's victory, and to be open to the possibility of coming to the negotiating table with Ukraine under American stewardship, knowing very well that Republican support in the broad for continuing to finance the Ukrainian war effort is somewhere between weak and non-existent. I think Putin does see an opportunity here to have some sort of deal brokered and some sort of, I'm not going to call it more than a ceasefire with Ukraine. There are a lot of hurdles to get over. I frankly couldn't see any agreement being struck which went any further than, say, the current armistice, or non-armistice, in fact, between North Korea and South Korea. Quite pertinent when one considers North Korean troops are involved in the Russia-Ukraine conflict at the moment. We may see something like that. I don't think whatever emerges by way of a cessation of active hostilities is going to be the final word in terms of Putin's aspirations as regards Ukraine. But I do think that of all the world leaders, Donald Trump is probably the only one who is capable of bringing some sort of temporary cessation, at least, albeit at a considerable cost to European security along the way, and of course to Ukraine itself.
Right. Right, and let me come to you on that note, Mr. Rao. Now, Putin also stated that Trump's claims on ending the war deserve attention, and here you have Mr. Newton also stating that at least there could be a temporary cessation to that war. I want to get your thoughts on this, and secondly, is there actual intent on Putin's part to end that war, because we've seen fresh incursions and fresh attacks?
Yeah, good morning. Well, I don't think it's that straightforward. For Putin, I think he's probably exhausted as well. It's not been an easy war. They thought they could finish it off pretty soon, pretty fast, but this has really gone on for too long, and he is hurting from many reports. So someone like Trump coming in and resolving this issue will be very helpful, but it's not going to be easy. I think if Trump wants Ukraine to give up some territory, it's not going to be acceptable. And there are some other geopolitical issues that need to be sorted out. So it's not going to be a straight, easy decision to really come in there and tell Putin to not do anything and just back off and just end this war. So it's going to take a long negotiation. But all things equal, I think Trump in the White House is much more favored versus Biden in the White House. So I think definitely the Republicans, in that sense, to stop the war. But I mean, and the Ukraine is not going to have a blank check going forward. It's going to be a lot lot of puts and takes going on, but net, I think let's see where it falls. There is some hope that the war will end, and that will be very helpful. But let's see. It's I don't know how far it will go. So at this point, I don't think there's a solution. But net, I think it's a good thing that Putin is wishing that Trump will come in and make some difference in the foreign policy there when it vis-a-vis those two countries. I don't know what the other part of your question was, but at a very high level, I think he's viewing it.
Right.
This is a honeymoon period, so to speak. So many things. Trump can go any which way. He's said a lot of things. A lot of things said on the campaign trail are really not really exercisable. So we'll wait and see where that falls. But at this point, it's net good news on the very high
Right.
level. But when you come down to ground
Right.
level, it's going to be very difficult to execute.
Right, absolutely. It'll involve a lot of policy implementations as well, different permutations and combinations. But Mr. Rao, let me ask you one more question before I go to Mr. Newton. What are businesses and business consultancies and of course venture capital partners like yourselves factoring in?
Yeah, I think we are very happy in the sense for three reasons. One is that it opens up the market a little bit. There was a lot of regulatory pushback, headwind in this whole space, and you saw a lot of M&A activity clamp down. So there was no, because companies were afraid to go out and announce any IPOs, acquire anybody, to really, the private equity and venture capital were finding it hamstrung essentially because of the regulatory environment. So at this point, that will open up. You'll see a lot of IPO activity. The technology sector will benefit definitely. With the lower taxes or the continuation of 21% taxes, even if it doesn't go down to 50 and 15, which he ideally wants, it's not going to go down to 15% tax rate. At 21%, if he extends that, that's good. Just the general climate in general, I think the venture capitalists and private equities don't like too much intervention from the government, and I think this setup will be very helpful for them. So I think businesses are looking at it very favorably, and you see that in the stock market. But let's wait and see which sector really benefits down the road. But overall, at this point, everyone's benefiting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Mr. Rao, in the run-up to the counting day, we've seen the kind of rally the markets were making. Already Trump trade is what some market experts told us, and of course, there's a whole lot of attention now being given to technology, semiconductor, and all of these spaces. But let me come to you, Mr. Newton. Now, on Western sanctions, Putin said that those have failed, and the world still needs Russia. Do you really think that there is a possibility that the United States will lift its sanctions under Trump, at least in the near future? Because, negotiations is something that, market experts and several geopolitical experts are factoring in. But Putin has not really shown, a liking to negotiating on that.
I think we need to be very careful about anything that Donald Trump says about sanctions against Russia at this stage. Let's try to align that with a couple of things. First of all, remember that Donald Trump was, as president between 2017 and 2021, was extremely outspoken about the German Nord Stream 2 project and becoming over-reliant on Russian gas. Now, clearly, America has a big interest in exporting natural gas, liquid natural gas to Europe. We're likely to see the European Commission approaching the Trump administration to try to stave off tariffs on imports to the US from Europe by offering to buy more US natural gas. So I think Trump will be looking at this largely from the perspective of American interests as far as sanctions against Russia is concerned. In fact, I think we can assume that Trump, like most world leaders, will look at almost every issue through the spectrum of the interests of his own country. That's only natural and normal. So I'd be cautious on that count. I'd also be cautious because of Trump's interest in tariffs in general and where he's going to go on tariffication against third countries' exports to the US. However, it's not just Trump who is involved in the sanctions against Russia equation. It's also, of course, the Europeans. And the Europeans will have a say in this. And I have to say that with a German election coming up now rather sooner than expected, following the de facto collapse of the German government just this week. Vote of no confidence in January, probable elections in March. Getting cheap Russian gas back into Germany would be a big boost for the economy there.
Right, Mr. Newton. Mr. Newton, let me also bring in one of the other key points that President Putin last night spoke about, and that is about a new world order that he was referring to. He said, and I quote, that a new world order is being formed and that the old world order has irreversibly passed. And one can surely see that with Trump's re-election. But if you could also expand a bit more on what exactly is he speaking about, on how the new world order is going to look like. I mean, we're seeing different movements and there are a lot of moving pieces. What's happening in the Middle East, India, China, Russia, Ukraine, and very recently the German government falling as well. So how are businesses like yourselves looking at this new world order?
I'm putting it in a historical context. This is exactly what one would expect at this stage in the geopolitical cycle. Now, geopolitical cycles last about a century or so. So this is all new for this generation, at least. But we've seen it plenty of times in the past, and we're clearly we have moved to a multipolar world where the period of American hegemony is effectively over. This begs questions all over the place. Much of the American architecture of the post-1945 global order still exists, and the majority of countries around the world subscribe to it to a greater or lesser extent. Now, in the meantime, of course, China is trying to build up a trade network through the Belt and Road Initiative, which does not include either the US or the EU, but focuses mainly on what, and I apologize for this phrase, is commonly referred to as the Global South. This creates quite a lot of difficulties for what we might call middle to larger powers and middle to smaller powers, and I include India in this. Now, India has a very strong relationship with the US. It's also a neighbor of China and has close historical and indeed contemporary ties with Russia. So for a country like India, they've got to try and find a balancing point between these competing forces of the what we might call the somewhat fading global order and the aspiring global order. And that applies just as much to business as it does to governments.
And that's exactly what Mr. Newton, India has been doing over the past few years. Of course, India's policy has been to think of India first, and which is why it's been building up new relationships, not just in the global south, the global north, and of course, Eastern Europe as well. On that point, let me come to you, Mr. Rao. Now, let me go to Obama's comment on what he said after Trump's re-election. He said that America has been through a lot, and he was, of course, referring to the pandemic and a whole lot of challenges that the country has had to face after that in terms of inflation, cost of living, and he said that those conditions have created headwinds around the world for democratic incumbents, and what's happening is America is definitely a reflection of that. I want to understand on that point, what does it really mean for businesses? How are businesses seeing this shift across the world, and are they prepared to deal with the strongman leaders?
If you look at this election, I think people are voting for strong leaders. They want someone who's strong and decisive and will do things the right way. And this election, if anything, was a referendum on inflation, essentially. And people don't like inflation. Nobody likes inflation. Businesses will really take note of that. In a way, Biden administration had to deal with all these things, the coming into this thing, the post pandemic issues, so the supply bottlenecks and all that they had to sort. They did a good job sorting out a lot of issues, but at the end of the day, the consumer looks at his bill, his grocery bills, he looks at the price of eggs, and that's how he makes his decisions as to who is good for him or not. I think that's what hit them there very hard. But every country will now take note of this. They will be very prudent in their policies. Inflation will be job number one, to cut that down, and businesses will take care of that as well. There won't be any room for any price increases without any good reasons. So all those things are there. So there is this election was a good mandate to be very prudent in their financial policies and go forward you can't just pump money into the system. It has to be very systematic, and that's the mistake that the Biden administration did. In order to please a lot of people, you can't just throw free money out there, and that's what they tried to do, and that bit them in the end. So a lot of issues out there. I think people will take note of that. You can't just buy peace and all that. You have to really do it prudently. Financial policy in the end is very important. Fiscal and monetary policy have to work together. So all those things will come together. I think people will take note of that overall.
Absolutely, Mr. Rao. So you're really hinting at a new paradigm shift coming in so far as these strongman leaders are concerned. And of course, seems like it's going to be good for businesses overall, given that you talk of a prudent approach. On that note, gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us this evening and sharing your thoughts with us on this big story. Ladies and gentlemen, time now for us to slip into a quick break, but lots more coming up on the other side. Don't go anywhere.